Hello, and welcome to another episode of Beastly Talks. As always, I'm your host, Ian Helling, and I'm very excited about this chat because I have a guest with me from pretty much the other side of the planet. It's Mr. Ross Macnamara from Mac Dog Training over in Scotland. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm having a good time. First thing in the morning here. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Looking forward to this.
Yeah, awesome. No, I think this is going to be good. And yeah, look, it is a big time difference. So it took a little bit of time to actually work this out. And I'm drinking wine and you're drinking coffee. So this should be an interesting conversation.
This coffee in here. This could be wine, bro.
Oh, well, true. Look, I make suggestions, but I'm being presumptuous. I should have said Scotch, probably.
Yeah, of course. No, it's just it's a very, very strong coffee.
Yep, fair enough. Well, that's good for everyone. All right, so someone contacted me and said you should contact Ross, you should have a chat to him because he's a funny guy. I hadn't heard of you, so I jumped on your social media, and honestly, the first post that I clicked on was you talking about shelter dogs, and you did the most well-hidden C-word bomb drop that I have ever heard. And I pissed myself laughing, and then I contacted you. So you were talking about how we give a lot of leeway to shelter dogs, and you say shelter dogs shouldn't be allowed to just be countries like Macedonia.
Yeah.
And that was just humor right up my alley. So I sent you a message, you replied immediately, and it's been a few weeks, but we managed to finally get it happen. So very excited to have this chat with you. Now, as always, we do a little bit of an origin story. So tell us who you are, how you got into dog training, what did you do before, and what do you kind of do now? Like, what is your day-to-day dog training life look like?
Yeah, so it goes all the way back to me and my brother when we were kids, constantly pestering my mum and dad for a dog, and my mum and dad constantly going, "No, you're not getting a dog." I think at the time we really wanted a German Shepherd, and I do always anytime I retell a story, I always like to give a shout out to my mum and dad for telling us, "No, you're not getting a dog," because we lived in a tiny little house and we wanted the biggest German Shepherd you can get. And my mum and dad were at least smart enough at that point to go, "No, we're not doing that. You guys are literally kids. You can't look after a German Shepherd, not in this house." That went on for a while. We really, really wanted a dog. I never did get the German Shepherd, but when we moved house a few years ago, we had a bit more space, we had a bit more time, and we, through a friend of a friend, we managed to rehome a golden retriever mixed with a Labrador. His name was Odie. He was about 9 months old. We didn't do much research into the dog himself. We just knew the dog needed a home. So we thought, golden retriever, Labrador is going to be perfect for the family, perfect for the kids, take him out on some nice easy walks, chill at the home. Cool. We brought him home and he was a nightmare for about 2 years. We didn't really know what we were getting into. 9 months to about a year is a difficult period for most dogs. And when you rehome a dog at that point as well, you're asking for a bunch of issues. So we ended up with a dog that, pulled on a leash constantly, separation anxiety, resource guarded, reactivity, all the usual stuff. And even to this day, I always like to point out right there on my hand, you can still see the scar from that was the first time he bit me. And then there was the second time he bit me. I think, in all honesty, he probably bit me 4 or 5 times. He turns out he wasn't great with kids. we found that out a little bit later on.
You were quite young at this point, weren't you?
So we brought Odie in when I was 9 years old. And so that was difficult for him. And I think the first bite happened within a few months. Um, we we decided to keep working with him. God knows why. I don't know why. But my mum and dad decided to keep him around. And again, I'm actually thankful for them in that regard, because we did keep him around, and we still had a whole bunch of behavioral issues for years. But it was mostly my brother that was looking after him. Eventually, my brother he moved away, and so I think at this point I was maybe about 12, 13. Odie was still basically ruling our entire life. My mum and dad were at work all day. It was just me. And I just kind of had enough. I was like, this guy's ruining our life. He's biting me. He's dragging me down the street. Like nothing about this is relaxing. And I honestly remember being 12 or 13, flicking through the TV channels and seeing a TV show called The Dog Whisperer with Caesar Milan. And I watched that
Hmm.
and I was like, that's cool. If he can do that with a pit bull, surely I can do this with my golden retriever. It shouldn't be that
Yep.
hard. Um, Kind of got really caught up in the Caesar Milan isms. Started applying some of that, even though he says, don't try this at home. I tried it at home, obviously, as you do.
Well, I
Um,
mean, so does Jackass says also professional stuntmen don't try this at home, and everyone fucking hurts themselves trying to
yeah, no,
replicate
I've
it.
got
So,
experience
you
with
know,
that one as well. Yeah, that was later into my teenage years, but I did the exact same thing there. You can start to see a pattern forming here.
you sure.
Um, So, obviously, I think this is probably something else we could talk about. I think Caesar gets a bad rap nowadays, but I think the big things I took away from him was, it's not necessarily just the dog that's the issue. It's the people, it's the lifestyle that the dog lives in. It's maybe about adjusting those things first. And, I took a lot away from that. And I think over the course of 6 months, just adjusting how I thought about Odie and his behavioral issues really made a big difference. We eventually created a much stronger bond. His behavioral issues more or less all started to disappear. That became sort of, there was something there where I realized this is quite fun. I enjoy this. I enjoy this process of teaching a dog things and helping a dog overcome their struggles. Odie and I grew a lot stronger because of that. A few years later, I brought in Hendrix, who's my border collie puppy. So that was another challenge in and of itself, but I raised him to a really good standard as well. Um, Eventually, kind of locally, especially through my mum and dad, people started to know me as a guy that can do some work with dogs. So just on the side, started helping people with their cockapoos, last apsos, just helping them walk on leash or stop barking and stuff. And I was just doing that all for free, just when I was a teenager. Never really thought it would be a job. And then I realized I could maybe make a bit of money from it. Um, I eventually started then taking it a bit more seriously, studying. I took a year out of my life just to study and learn from other trainers as well. And then it just kind of became a job, and I'm not even really sure how that happened. It just became a full-time job. I'm still not complaining about it to this day, but it became something I started to really look forward to every single day. I got to the point where Odie, who was essentially the dog that got me into this and was a problematic case in and of itself, he was joining me on my one-to-ones, my consults as the stooge dog that would help the other dogs, and it became a really nice full circle moment when that started to happen. Unfortunately, Odie passed away in 2021. He made it to about coming up on 15. But I'm really proud that I did manage to give him the majority of his life was pretty exceptional because of I just put a little bit of work and understanding into him. I think he was originally given up because of his behavioral issues, and we were close to giving him up. And I think the fact that we didn't, and I tried really hard to get him to a good place, was a very rewarding thing, and it's something I like to try and give back to other people if I can.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, that's a quite a common, I guess, dog training story. That's how a lot of people get into it. have a dog that's a little bit of a problem, and then they get some help and they realize, oh shit, you can actually do things about this, and the dog gets better and people get excited and the cycle just continues. But
Mhm.
like, I do want to talk a little bit about rescue dogs because I know you've posted about that on your social media and stuff. But I guess one of the things that I tend to say to people, and a lot of people forget about this, is that good dogs don't usually end up in shelters.
Mhm.
Um, so when people adopt a dog and they go like, "Oh my god, he's got behavioral issues," I'm like, "Yeah, what the fuck do you expect?"
Yeah.
Like that's kind of probably why he ended up there in the first place. But you know, as we know, most dogs can be turned around with good training. And while there are some exceptions where you have genetic issues and that kind of stuff, they are a vast minority
Mhm.
at the end of the day.
Mhm.
Um, awesome. So, like I was saying at the start of the chat, I looked up your social media and I have had a big look at it today as well. And you have a very funny way of going about dog training information. And it's probably half dog training information, half just taking a piss. And I love that. So, how did you like? I just before we get stuck into the dog training stuff, I just want to know a little bit about training in Scotland and also your like for lack of a better phrase, your social media journey. How did you kind of start building a following? Because you've got a pretty big following, I think 60,000 plus people. And a lot of, I guess, dog trainers are really good with dogs, but they tend to not be the greatest at anything else, whether that is people, whether it's running a business, whether it's social media. Dog trainers, I'm pretty sure every dog trainer on the planet has ADHD or autism one way or another, which is what makes it so good with dogs, but so bad at everything else. So
Yeah.
I guess like kind of how do you approach social media? How did you start building a following? And is there a pattern to it, or are you just literally having fun with it?
So I think every dog trainer, and this will apply to every other industry as well, but if we just stick to dog training, every dog trainer has an Instagram, has a TikTok, has Facebook. But we all use it just, I mean, we're using it to gain business at the end of the day. That's what we're doing. Um, and ultimately that's what I'm doing as well, obviously. However, like that was why I started to post in the first place. And I felt like there's only so many times you can post just I don't know, like a single image on Instagram of like, here's why I do this. Or and some vague piece of information and content. I think and that may work for the individual and their business. However, my approach to Instagram and social media after that was, well, I want to try and help as many people as I can. So let's play the attention game. Let's see what works to get people's attention. And then let's see if I can turn people around in terms of their understanding, their knowledge. And then maybe if that um, translates into business, fantastic as well. I started out with just the typical, single post on Instagram and all that stuff, and just like quick fun tips. It was fine. Eventually, once I realized I could just have a bit of fun, it was much easier to capture people's attention. And when you can capture people's attention, you can then start making them think different things as opposed to just bombarding them with information that they don't think they actually need. However, if I can not take myself as seriously, I think it's somewhat refreshing to a lot of people to see someone who is a professional not being very professional.
Mhm.
Everyone has a dog. Every person, like every second house in the industry is someone with a dog. And so when they see a dog trainer mentioning all these big words, all these terminologies that they've never heard of, as soon as you say differential reinforcement, that person's scrolling.
Yeah.
They don't know what differential reinforcement is. They don't care. They don't know how it applies to their little Barkay shih tzu. It doesn't mean anything to them. Now, it does, and we know that it does, but we need to find, we as dog trainers, and this is my personal approach, we need to find a way to make dog owners care about training their dog, about giving their dog the best life. Most people think they're already doing that. I think by the number of dogs that have behavioral issues, we can safely argue that they're not giving their dog the best life. But it's hard to like get in front of a camera and just shout at people and say you're not doing enough for your dog. Whereas if we
Mm.
can take it back a little bit, if I can take the piss out of myself, if I can make a couple of dumb jokes, it gets people on board, even if it's just for the first 3 seconds. And then they're going to be much more likely to listen to what I have to say. And if that is just a couple of quick tips, or if it's some information on reactivity, or if it's some information on rescue dogs, it will apply to people out there. And then they'll start to take that information in. And even if they scroll after that, that's fine. But then maybe they'll see another video, or maybe that will stick in their head, and maybe they'll do some more research into it later on that evening. And before you know it, now we've got the ball rolling. And now
Mhm.
maybe they're not going outside and buying all the fanciest new tool, and maybe they're not working in differential reinforcement just yet or anything like that. But they're now at least thinking about their dog in a different way. And I think that creates momentum going forward. And I feel like that's how I try to use my social media. I'm not just doing it to gain business. I'm trying to educate, but I'm trying to educate in a way that's accessible, because ironically, dog training is not very accessible considering
No.
that everyone on the planet has a dog. I think that's something that we should, as professionals, be looking at a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point because I very much fall into the trap of, hey, I need to give people information.
Mhm,
And then I'm not very good, which is interesting because when I work with people face to face, I'm actually really good at taking complicated things and making them simple.
mhm,
But then when I post something on Instagram, I'm like, oh, it has to be super informational and like informational. Is that even a word? Like it has to be super informative, right?
mhm,
And I think we do get a little bit wrapped up in our own heads where we go, it's important to use the right terminology and people to go like, I don't give a fuck. I just
mhm.
want my dog not to pull on the leash. Like, how can I do that in step one, two, three kind of thing?
Yeah.
But no, that's an excellent point. And look, I very much enjoy your social media when I had it sent to me and when I was kind of poking through it. And that's kind of the basis for a lot of the conversations that we're having today. But social media is one, like I am terrible at social media, which is why when someone has good social media, I always want to ask them like, how did you get to that point?
Mhm, mhm,
Because I have a background in advertising, so you would think I'd be good at
mhm,
this, but I'm actually terrible at it.
mhm.
So there we go. Now, I want to ask you about one more thing before we get stuck into the actual training side of things. And this is, what is the state of dog training in Scotland currently? Because I know in England, there's the XL bully not ban, but they have to all wear muzzles.
Mhm.
They are essentially considered dangerous dogs just by default. And it's really weird, how they determine whether a dog is an XL bully or not. But I do also, if I'm not 100% wrong, they're trying to fight for an e-collar ban at the moment in Scotland. Is that correct? So give us a little bit of an idea because a lot of our listeners are American and Australian primarily. So what is the actual state of dog training in Scotland at the moment?
So the laws that came into place regarding the XL bullies in England, they quickly came into place in Scotland shortly after, and it's more or less the exact same restrictions. Um, is that your dog needs to be neutered or spayed, muzzled at all times when outside, and on a 6 foot leash. Other restrictions come into play at that point as well, but yeah, for all intents and purposes, your dog has to live by the same restrictions as a dangerous dog. So a dog that has previously been out and attacked, God knows how many people or other dogs, will be held to the same restrictions as an XL bully that's never done any of that, which is really unfortunate. It's kind of become the new normal here. It's really unfortunate to see. Even my own bully, just because she essentially looks like an XL bully, she does live by the same restrictions as well. Because outside of the laws as such, I guess, in the zeitgeist, which is a weird word for me to use, but the general idea, the perception of these dogs has shifted massively in the last few years. Um, if you're walking a bully, you will get looks. It's one of those things. Which is why personally, just to go on a quick tangent, I like to try and take Pepper out in as many places as possible because she is a well trained dog, and I like to try and make an example of her, and that not all bullies are are these out of control machines that people shouldn't have. Like, she can be a great dog, but besides the point that I am sort of subject to that because I do see the looks that I get from walking around with a bully. I do get the people crossing the street. I do get a lot of that. And that is just her living with those restrictions as well. Pepper is also, she's prong collar trained and e-collar trained. The e-collar has been a massive help for her, just in terms of her general development and behaviour. But you're right in that there is a push to ban the e-collar in Scotland. I know in England and Wales it got really close last year, but typically the way that the government handles things in Scotland, they just copy England. So anything that happens in England is going to happen in Scotland. And there's been a push to ban the e-collar up here as well. Recently, I think it was a few months ago, I won't say who, but a politician and his team did reach out to me and they said, "Hey, we're putting through some suggestions through to the government that we're looking to for a proposal to ban the e-collar, and we're looking for your support." And I gave them a big long message back saying, "You have picked the wrong person, and here are the reasons why." Because I think the e-collar is a massively helpful tool that is completely misunderstood. And my fear is that the wrong people being the people that don't have any experience with this tool and have never experienced how it can actually massively positively benefit a dog's life. These are going to be the people that are putting the wrong, misleading, incorrect information towards the people in power. And the people in power don't, they're just taking information from where they can get it. And I think there's obviously some bias in there as well, for sure. But most politicians don't know what they're looking at and they'll just vote for the things that will keep them in office.
Yep.
And if that means banning these cruel electric shock collars, then I can see why they would do it. And I think at the moment, they're still not banned. I don't know where it's going to go. I'm not massively optimistic about it. I'm not saying they are going to get banned. I think if we push enough, and I think if more trainers, and not even just trainers, I think if more everyday owners talk about the positive impact that the e-collars had on their life, I think that will massively sway things. But that's going to be a big movement in and of itself. I think the issue is these things only tend to happen when the e-collar ban starts to get close.
Mm.
And then it's almost like we dodge the bullet a little bit and then everything goes quiet until a year later when it comes back. And then there's a big movement and it seems like there's no consistent push back until there needs to be. And then things kind of hit DEFCON 1 at that point. Um, but yeah, that's the way it goes. Things are very treacherous. They're up in the air just now in terms of e-collar usage.
Yeah, it is such a shame because again, I I can't tell you how many. So prong collars are banned here in Victoria where I live, but e-collars are legal. If I drive to Sydney, I have to take the e-collar off my dog, but I can put a prong collar on him. And
Mhm.
so here down here, like everything is individualized by state, and it is a little bit of a mess. But it's like you said, I politicians don't give a shit about dog training. They give a shit about being re-elected.
Right.
And so when someone comes to them and go like, "Hey, if you want to, vote for animal welfare because that's going to get a lot of people on your side, you have to ban these cruel." And it's always like super emotional language. It's
Mhm.
these cruel shock collars that are abusing dogs on a daily basis, blah blah blah. And again, it was interesting because I was talking to another trainer friend of mine the other day, and he was saying that like most dog owners don't even know that there's a war going on in the dog training industry. They're like, "What do you mean people are arguing about how to train a dog? Like, isn't just dog training kind of thing?"
Mhm. Mhm.
So people have no idea. But then if someone just walks up to you on the street and shows you a prong collar and said, "Would you abuse your dog with this?" You would go like, "Hell no." Like that thing looks horrible and cruel.
Mhm. Mhm.
But then you learn the nuances of it and suddenly you see the big changes in the dogs. And it is a shame that the kind of least educated and most fanatical people tend to have the loudest voices in this industry. It is a big problem. And I think Wales did ban the e-collar some like maybe not 10 years ago, but like a while back. But now they're trying to get them back because there has been such a significant increase in, dog attacks on sheep.
Yep.
And then someone goes, but just keep a leash on your dog. But then half the dogs that attack the sheep are wearing a leash. So they've actually managed to like pull out of the owner's hands. And now you go, okay, so what is the solution then? Is it no more dogs? Dogs aren't allowed to go anywhere, which I do want to get stuck back into a little
Hmm.
bit later. But I do feel like instead of training dogs and being effective in training dogs, we are now just told to make the dog's world smaller and smaller, which is creating more and more reactivity.
Yes.
Um, I want to get into reactivity a little bit later, but that is just my little rant on it. Um, but yeah, okay. So you pretty much have the same situation that England is kind of battling at the moment.
Yeah.
That that makes sense. I guess it's the same as New Zealand and Australia to a
Yeah.
certain degree
Yeah.
here.
And there's
Australia
always
does
the,
something.
the little brother that's up there will always copy the big brother that's down there. That's how it goes.
Yeah, exactly. Um, all right. So I want to talk about one of my favorite topics right now because I did see that you made a post about this, and that is stress, the importance of stress,
Mm,
and the I guess the misfortune of bubble wrapping a puppy for their entire lives and what that actually leads to.
mhm,
So I talk a lot about bubble wrapping dogs because that is something I'm vehemently opposed to.
mhm,
And most people hear the word stress and they panic because they have found themselves in a super stressful situation at some point and they want to avoid that at any cost.
mhm.
But when we talk about stress in dog training, what is your approach to introducing puppies to stress? How do you
Mm,
explain to people that stress isn't a bad thing? I guess is what I'm asking. And what is the importance of stress in order to create resilience?
yeah. I think the way I always go about trying to explain these, I guess, slightly more abstract concepts, and this is in regards to stress or anything else when it comes to dogs, is I always try to put it in human terms. I always say like let's not talk about the dog just now. Let's imagine what your life would be like if you never had to go through stress. And I think initially the initial reaction you get from people is, "Oh, that would be fantastic." And it's like, no, I'm not talking about the overwhelming sort of like deafening, crushing sort of stress that you get that you struggle that people that can really struggle with in their day to day life. I mean, just the little things in life, those little stressors. It could just be the analogy I always give is the first day of school. Incredibly stressful. Nobody liked the first day of school. I never liked my first day of school. But if we didn't go to that first day of school, what would our life been like now? And it seems so abstract and it seems so it seems such a silly argument, but this is what people are essentially going through when they are bubble wrapping their dogs. And I say, okay, if you told your mum that you didn't want to go to school on the first day, and she said, okay, that's fine, we'll try again tomorrow. And on the Tuesday, do you want to go to school? No, I don't want to go to school. Okay, that's fine. What about Wednesday? No, I don't want to go on Wednesday. Eventually, a pattern starts to form, and we start to get more and more pushback months into this. You know, a year into it, we still haven't went to school. So now we're just prolonging the issue, and now we've almost created sort of a boogeyman around this thing. The stress has now accumulated so much over a longer period of time, and it's now going to be much harder to deal with, as opposed to just on that first day, just being like, no, sorry, this is going to suck for a little bit, but you probably just need to endure it. But it's going to be over before you know it, and everything's going to be fine. And I think that's how I try and explain stress is that as long as you put our dog through a bit of stress and they come out the other side fine, everything's going to be okay. That's what builds resilience. If we put our dog through stress and they can't cope and they can't recover from it, then yeah, of course we're doing something wrong. And 100% there's a nuance there that I think a lot of people do need help with, but I think it's achievable in in everyday life, whether it's with puppies or with older dogs. How many dogs do we know that they can't be left alone for 2 minutes? Okay, without owner coming back and telling them it's going to be okay, or or coddling them or picking them up and or just sitting with them, and we eventually start to revolve our whole life around the dog because we can't leave the dog alone. Whereas, wouldn't it be a better idea to just slightly stress the dog out for 2 to 5 minutes, show them that it's going to be okay to come back eventually, and then that will massively open up not just their life but our life as well, because now they're not as stressed and we're not as stressed and we're all living a much happier life. So it's going to be short-term stress for long-term goals. And that's the way I always look at it, as we can't just bubble wrap our dogs. We do need to add small amounts of stress. Don't make your dog have a mental breakdown, but let's be smart about this. If your dog doesn't like the crate, that's fine. Let's work them through it. Is it going to be stressful? 100%. But is it going to be beneficial in the long run? Yes, also. So that's where it's probably best to put in some of our effort.
Yeah, and I do really like the school analogy because at the end of the day, where do most kids learn their social skills? Where do they meet friends? Where do they have the world open up to them and see different points of view,
Mhm,
etc.? So it's at school, and so
mhm,
yeah, that day one, you might need a little kick up the ass to go like, hey, just
mhm,
deal with this. Like
mhm,
I know it's going to be stressful, but you're going to come out the other side having a better time. I can almost guarantee you that.
mhm,
But yeah, it's I think like not to get too scientific or bro sciencey here, but like there's two different types of stress. There's stress, which is the productive type
mhm,
of low level stress to that activates us into behavior to actually overcoming something. But then it's like you were saying, then we have distress. Where dogs are just thrown in the deep end, like, hey, sink or swim, see what the hell
mhm.
happens.
Yeah.
And that is not conducive to learning. And
Mhm,
I think the one thing that I tend to see in clients, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but they shelter the dog from the low level stress for such a
mhm,
prolonged period of time for the first like 6 months of the dog's life. And then they get frustrated with the fact that the dog is kind of holding them back. And so they try to like, throw a leash on them and drag them out into the deep end to go like, hey, you need to learn to deal with this because I want my life to be better. And those are two very conflicting
yeah,
ideologies that do not benefit the dog whatsoever. If we turned it around, I think we would have created much more resilient dogs and much happier both dogs and people. So
yeah.
yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on like someone contacts you with a new puppy. What is your approach to kind of say, hey, we're going to teach you to tolerate some things, especially if you have a little bit of maybe a nervy puppy to begin with?
Mhm,
Like, what is your approach to not go in the deep end, but also go like, hey, we're not going to beat around the bush?
yeah. We would start with making sure that we get to know that puppy inside and out real soon. What drives that puppy? What motivates that puppy? Before we start worrying, or before we start putting that dog in situations where they're going to worry and panic a little bit, let's make sure we have something the dog really enjoys, and that we know that the dog really enjoys. And it could be food drive, which is fine. I typically prefer to work with dogs that do have a little bit more. I prefer to work with dogs in play, especially younger dogs, because the play is ultimately what's going to build more resilience in the long run anyway, because we can actively work them through different forms of negative reinforcement in play. You can do a little bit of that in your food work, but in play we can work with the dog in negative reinforcement, and we can start adding little stressors into their play, which is then going to get them more used to the concept of stress and resilience. And so then we also have some form of motivation in our back pocket. When we then start taking that young dog, that puppy, out into situations where they're a little bit worried, they're a little bit nervy, we can help work them through it instead of just standing there letting them get into that form of distress where they then start to panic. And then before we know it, we're starting to backslide. And then we're going to have to make a beeline out of there because now our dog's starting to panic. And before we know it, that's a learned event. And so let's really get to know our dog first. What motivates our dog? What gets our dog going? What keeps our dog happy? Now that we've got that figured out, let's go put that dog into some challenging situations and let's see how the dog performs. And let's just observe. It might even just be that. Like let's take the dog outside some sort of hardware shop where there's going to be lots of noise and people coming by and maybe people trying to interact with the dog. First couple of sessions could just be watching that dog, see how it takes the environment in. And if it's just a little bit of nervousness, it could be enough for the dog to just easily overcome that stress by itself. But if we've got a little bit more going on there, and we would judge that based off of what we've seen from the dog, yeah, then we might need to start pulling out some stuff from the tool belt. We might need to start bringing our play out. Might need to start charging our markers, or we might need to start doing some other exercises around these things to help build that confidence. But I always try and say to people is like, it's not going to be an overnight thing. Confidence building, especially when we look at it in the larger scope of behavior modification. So if we look at an older dog that maybe does have some reactivity issues, there might be an element of confidence building in there that needs to happen. A lot of the other things in your reactivity work, so it could be general obedience, it could be charging your markers, it could be your food book. That can all happen relatively quickly. That can happen within a week. But your confidence building in terms of how the dog handles new environments and the exposure, you can be talking weeks to months at that point. Not to say it's going to take that long to fix the dog, but for the dog to emotionally feel better about those things, that can take a much longer time, especially if you're working with people that are a little bit more inexperienced and don't have necessarily the same observational skills or physical abilities. Yeah, we're talking slightly longer term just for the confidence building. So I always try to say to people, this is the part that's going to take the longest, but it's going to take the longest for good reason because your dog is having to learn things by itself. It's not having to learn. Um, you're not going to be coaching. You're not going to be coaching it as such. The dog needs to learn to handle its own emotions in those situations, which is you're asking quite a lot from a dog in those points, and you'll be asking even more from a pup. So you really need to take these things slow and not try to rush it at all.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's a couple of things that you said there that I thought was really good. But like, when, especially if I'm dealing with reactivity, what I tend to try to explain to people is your dog has trained itself into this reactivity.
Hmm.
Now, it takes a while to unlearn some of those bad decision points before we can actually start teaching the dog the opposite. So, a dog that pulls on the lead, look, we can usually, in most cases, undo that pretty quickly. But a dog that is maybe has a little bit of low stress tolerance, is a little bit fearful, and started showing reactive behavior towards another dog, and that dog goes away, suddenly the release of the fear is actually a far more powerful driver than any form of positive reinforcement that we can do. And for every walk, the dog gets better at being reactive. And so there has to be a period of unlearning before we can do like, hey, actually, you can just walk straight past dogs and not really worry about it. But I think another really good thing that you said there is I find a lot of people get hung up in systems and they forget to just look at the dog. So instead of actually just taking the dog out, sitting down and watching what the puppy does, especially, and puppies are kind of like clean slate. So it's particularly important to actually look at them and go like, hey, how do you perceive the world? How do you feel about the world? And a lot of people just go straight to like, we use this tool, we use these traits, and this is how we're going to fix everything. But a system without observation just kind of squashes everything into the same ideology. And I guess we've all seen how that has gone to shit many times, left, right, and
Hmm.
center.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I think like the observation thing is absolutely an important one. But what are the kind of primary things that you look for? Say in a puppy, because I guess with older dogs we tend to know a little bit more about them, a little bit about their mental state. But in young puppies, again, just open, chaotic minds that perceive the world very differently from an older dog. So what are some like key things that you would look for when you start working with a new puppy that you don't really know?
I would really want to look for a certain level of curiosity from that dog, and that might be curiosity towards. It doesn't even necessarily need to be curiosity towards the thing that it is nervous about. I mean, curiosity just in general, like in the house. What does the puppy do? I think a lot of people, regular owners, would maybe get annoyed with the puppy going in and jumping on the countertop or going into the bins or running up the stairs all the time. Like to me, that's a sign of a puppy that can take in its environment pretty well. So if I'm getting that feedback from the owners, I'm like, well, let's take it to new environments and let's see if we can get a similar behavior to that. I want that puppy exploring. I want that puppy investigating things because I think the more the puppy goes and explores, the more it's going to learn about its environment. And then we don't have to jump into, like you said, the systems that everyone, like, we're not just going to sit outside the shop and just click, feed, click, feed, click, feed, click, feed. Because ultimately, what does that really teach the dog? It means every time there's a person coming by, there might be a click, and then they will probably get some food. And then what? Whereas it would be really nice if the puppy, and we can imagine this is maybe somewhat of a nervous puppy now. Maybe it sees someone coming out carrying a bag of bird feed or something like that. So something that the dog's never really seen before. Maybe it does a quick bark and jumps back. Maybe it does the high frequency bark of the yep, 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 and then bounces back, right? Most people at that point would be like, oh my God, my dog's frightened. Let's pick them up. Let's remove them from this situation. Whereas I need to be sort of like the mean bastard that goes, no, 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 we're going to leave your puppy right here and your puppy's going to deal with this right now because if we take the puppy away, your dog's going to have an issue with bird feed in the future. And let's not have that become a problem because then that's going to start displacing into everything else. So if your puppy has a little moment like that, that's fine. It's just information. It's just feedback. It's just the dog's way of saying, I'm a little bit unsure about that. And honestly, at that point, I think a lot of people would expect me to get the clicker out, or they would expect me to string the puppy up on a slip lead because it's barked. I'm like, no, I'm just going to stand here. I'm going to look at the puppy. I'm probably going to genuinely say something along the lines of, what are you doing? That was a bit silly. Let's go look at it. And I'll motion to the puppy, like, let's go up together. Let's look at this thing. I might talk to the person. I might start interacting with that person. And my puppy might be running around and it might jump back. And then you might get that little moment where, that sort of stance that puppies take, or just like dogs in general, where their back legs are back and their front feet are back, but they're sticking their nose as far forward as they can. And then they start to air scent. Fantastic. That's what I'm looking for. Because now I'm starting to see that the dog's recovering, the dog's starting to bounce back. And more importantly, I'm starting to see that curiosity start to come out. And what I always tell people is a dog will always become curious. It's just a matter of time. Some dogs, it's going to take a really long time. Some dogs, they will just have that quick bark and then go, okay, I'm done. I actually want to figure out what's going on here. But the moment we start allowing that dog to be curious, and the moment we start encouraging it, that's when we start getting a dog that becomes much more confident in itself and its own skin, because they have an internal reinforcement at that point of they've seen something that was scary. They build a little bit of confidence in themselves to go and investigate it, and then they realize there's nothing to be scared of. And to me, that's a much better approach than click, feed, click, feed, click, feed. Okay, session done, back in the car, let's go home.
100%. And I think curiosity is such an under like it's such a forgotten about thing in dog training, and especially in young dogs. Like you said, that kind of hesitation, leaning forwards but still air scenting, kind of going like, I'm not 100% sure about this, but I want to know what it is. And I
Mhm.
feel like the phrase that I say the most when I am raising a puppy or I have foster puppies in the house or whatever is, every time I hear a puppy squeal, I just look at them and I say, did you die? And they kind of look at me and they hold their paw up like, oh, please help me. And I'm like, you don't need
Mhm.
help. Just fucking walk it off. And they
Yeah,
kind of just walk away and they go back to playing like not a big deal.
yeah, yeah,
But
exactly.
I- I'd love to. I might have to do this at some point, but I think someone should create a workshop that simply is called Tough Love Dog Training,
Mm,
because it was funny you saying you have to be the mean bastard and go like, hey, actually, we just need to sit here and deal with this. But that is actually by far the best way that you can create resilience in a dog.
yeah.
And I'm gonna steal a little phrase from J Jack. I presume you're
Mm,
familiar with J Jack, the
of course,
American
yeah.
trainer.
Yeah.
J Jack's fantastic, and I'd love to have a chat to him at some point. But he always talks about happiness is resistance overcome.
Overcome. Yeah, yeah,
Meeting a challenge head on and beating the challenge, there is nothing that makes you feel more powerful and more like tougher or resilient than that. And so instead of sheltering, instead of bubble wrapping, like we said, dogs and walking them away from every difficult situation, it would be really good if every puppy owner just went like, hey, we're just going to sit here and let this play out.
yeah.
And when you calm down, I'm going to tell you you're a good dog rather than panic with you and run in
Mhm.
the opposite direction.
I think the thing that's tricky about that, and even if we just like sort of the situation like I described, I think the problem is it looks messy. It doesn't look
Yeah.
clean. It does look like the dog's unsure, and for sure, the dog is lacking confidence in that moment. And I think people are so scared of their dog potentially gaining a complex from that that they don't even put the dog in the situation in the first place. But it's actually really counterintuitive because if you don't allow the dog to go through that, you'll still receive the complex at the end. The dog is now going to have it in its head that that's scared, and so we need to kind of sit in that moment. And I'll have to coach the owners through it more than I'll have to coach the dog. So I give the leash to the owners and I say, yeah, just your dog's, your little puppy, your little 10-week-old puppy is going to have to kind of go through this just now. And the puppy looks a bit scared and it's barking a little bit and all that stuff. And I think the owners are looking for the click feed situation, or they're looking to like tell me to put the dog into some form of obedience or something. I'm just like, nope, just sit there. This is going to be us for the next couple of minutes. I'm like, are you sure? I'm like, yeah. It doesn't look like your before and afters on social media. You know what I mean? You're not going to get the finished product, especially not from a 10-week-old pup, especially not from a 12-week-old pup. It's going to be a bit messy, and that's okay. It's not going to be perfect. And I think once people get that through their heads, training becomes a lot easier because they drop a lot of those, my dog has to be perfect. My training has to be perfect. Sometimes you need to go through it. And hey, sometimes it might not go well. That's okay. It's still information. It just means that when we go out next time, we remember that and we may take it a little bit easier on the dog, or we may take some more steps to make sure the dog is successful in that. But one blow up at someone coming out of a shop is not going to be the end of the world.
No, and that is an excellent point because so much of good dog training is just kind of sitting there and not doing a whole lot,
Yeah.
just kind of allowing the dog to experience. And look, if you're dealing with an older reactive dog, sure, there has to be some feedback, whether that's
Mhm,
aversive feedback or
mhm,
whether it's positive reinforcement for good choices. But
mhm.
honestly, in a puppy, there's a lot of just fucking sitting around and looking at stuff in
Yeah,
different locations. That's kind of part of what it is. And
exactly.
I think a lot of owners feel like they're not getting their money's worth because nothing's actively
Yeah.
happening. And I feel like a lot of dog training students who are just kind of starting out or new trainers, they feel like I have to take the leash and I have to do something
Mhm,
because nothing's happening. And you're like, no, actually, the best thing you can do is let it happen.
mhm.
That's kind of
Yep.
what needs to happen in this moment.
Yeah, I think a lot of dog trainers get stuck in busy work. And I'm not
Yeah.
quite sure why that is. I think that's maybe because we have slight insecurity about the product we're delivering to the owners. But I also think it's because we feel like we need to do more than we actually do need to. When really, I am more than happy just to sit around with a puppy and just let them watch and make that the full session. As long as I'm explaining to the owners exactly what this is and like this is socialization, this is habituation, this all this stuff is incredibly important. Talking about how this is going to massively pay off. Probably not now. It'll massively pay off 6 months' time. A
Yeah.
year down the line, when you're not going to need me anymore because we've essentially built confidence and stress resilience in your dog now. And I think once people realize that, they realize, sitting around outside a shop is actually, they are getting their money's worth at that point. But I try not to delve into just busy work and just teaching the dog nonsense for the sake of teaching the dog nonsense. Like you're going to get much more bang for your buck letting the dog observe as opposed to trying to force a 10-week-old puppy into a heel past these distractions when the puppy doesn't even know what heel is. Never mind healing around distractions. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where our industry is a little bit broken between like I feel like there's a missing gap because people hear dog training and they think sit, drop, stand,
Yep.
heel, and then they hear behavior and they automatically go to vet behaviors and medication. And you're like, no, but like the in between bit where we kind of just understand what's happening in the dog's head without, like you said, trying to do the busy work, without trying to distract them away from, things that might be freaking them out a little bit, but just letting them experience watching their behavior and kind of being, I guess, in a sense, we have to be a little bit reactive to what the dog does.
Mhm.
Whereas with an older, more maybe aggressive dog, we would be more proactive. With a puppy, you kind of have to go like, hey, let, let's let this play out and see what actually comes of it, because that is going to give us information moving forward in how we can best help this puppy.
Yeah. When we're dealing with true behavior mods, we're really having to take into account how the dog is feeling and taking these situations in. There's not always necessarily going to be a quick fix to that, but a lot of it is one, figuring out what the history of this dog is. You know, it's not going to be like your puppy at this point. There's going to be learned behavior that's come into play there, and sort of like you mentioned earlier, there's going to be a lot, especially if we're dealing with any sort of reactivity, but particularly fear-based reactivity, defensive-based reactivity. We have a really strong foundation of negative reinforcement there, which is going to really work against us because that dog has experienced stress and has realized the best way to deal with that stress is to send it away by spark, lunge, and growl. And so we have a really, really not no, we. It's not that we just have a history of that. We have an incredibly strong history of that because it's been based in negative reinforcement. It's been based in fight or flight, and typically that only has to happen a couple of times. Dogs approached, our dogs barked, sent that dog away. 2 or 3 repetitions of that, the dog's like, cool, that works. I'm going to keep that approach. And so then it's then up to us to somehow convince the dog that that is no longer necessary. But everything in that dog's brain is saying that this sequence of behaviors is 100% necessary to keep me safe. And so we need to come in, we need to do a lot of prep work. And some of that probably will involve some level of obedience. And then we then need to start taking the dog out and what I just call the resocialization process. We almost just kind of go back to like that dog being a puppy. We start showing it different environments. But like you said, that dog will need more feedback based on the decisions it makes in those environments. And it will need some more goods and it will need some more bads. But it's only because that dog's alignment and thought process is so out of whack at this point, simply because of the previous history of behavior. It is so convinced that everything is a threat, and it's our job to convince it's not a threat. The only way we can do that is by showing them all the things that that dog thought was a threat and saying, look, it's actually not scary anymore, but your behavior wasn't making this any better.
So, are you actually saying that not just locking the dog up in a house and hiding behind cars when another dog walks past on the other side of the road is not the correct approach?
I don't know. I've had people that have tried that for 4 years and they've not come back with any better results. So it's probably, yeah, probably doesn't seem to work all that well.
Yeah, fair enough. No, I've had the same story many times as well. It's I actually okay, so I want to move into rescue dogs after this because I think this is a good segue. But I literally had someone who would not walk down sudden like particular streets because they knew there were never cars parked there that they could run to and hide behind. And I'm like, that is a shitty life to have with your dog.
Yeah.
I'm sorry you've gotten to this point, but how about we start turning that around? And they're doing fantastic now. They're going
Ah,
to
nice. Nice. I can kind of
social
see
walks
how
with other
people
dogs and everything.
I can see how people get to that point. You know,
Oh yeah.
like people really obviously the behavior starts to get worse at a certain point, and I think people can really quickly find themselves out of depth with their dog. And again, maybe this is another problem with the industry, and they go looking for so much information, they get a bit of over-analysis paralysis, where there's so many decisions to make and so many different approaches, and people saying this is the right way to do it. No, this is the right way to do it. Absolutely, don't do this and don't do this. And I think when they start to figure out, like you said, most people don't know about the dog trainer wars. But when they do find out about it, it it's only worse on the average dog owner. Me and you can argue with a trainer that disagrees with our ideologies all day long, and then we'll go to sleep absolutely fine, knowing that our dogs are fine. However, the owner, the everyday owner that somehow catches wind of this on social media or wherever it is we're arguing, they don't they don't know how to make up their mind. And so they
Mm,
see two camps of people arguing. They don't know which one's right or wrong. They go to bed and they're the ones that are still worrying about what approach is best to take for their dog. And then that's
yeah.
how we get to the point where their dog's sheltered in the house and they're hiding behind cars because they don't know what to do.
Mm. No, that's actually an excellent point. I think the trainer wars, they certainly hurt the average dog owner probably more than they hurt dogs and dog
Yeah,
trainers for sure.
100%.
100%.
100%.
All right, cool. So now that we've talked a little bit about, a low tolerance to stress and dogs that easily become reactive and even the negative reinforcement aspect of driving a trigger away. I want to talk a little bit about rescue dogs because I've seen you've done a fair bit of work with rescue dogs in the past. I think you've talked a little bit about that on your social media. So I want to talk about three things. These are the three things that drive me insane
Mm,
when I hear people talk about them on social media. And it's also the three things that I focus very heavily on if I'm helping a rescue dog or a shelter dog, whatever, or I'm taking in a dog for training. So the first thing is the 3-3-3 rule.
mm,
The 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months,
mhm,
the decompression period, I guess. And then not all shelter dogs have been abused. Can we just like fucking put a pin in that for now?
mhm, mhm,
But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on all of this. And then I want to talk about the importance of structure
mm,
because I find a lot of people, they get a dog from a shelter and they go, oh, poor little Fluffy, you've been in prison for so long. We're going to come home. You're going to have free run of the house, do whatever the hell you want. And a few days later, there's absolute chaos everywhere all the time.
yeah.
So the 3-3-3 rule, not all dogs have been abused, and the importance of structure. Like, what is your approach to helping a shelter dog? And do you often work with people before they get a dog from the shelter to put any kind of structure in place? Or do you kind of jump in the deep end and look at the dog and tackle it as it hits you?
I wish I had more opportunities to sort of guide people before they take on a rescue dog. There's been a few instances where that has happened, and it's made everything so much easier because we can talk about all that stuff and you can almost set expectations before we. And I think just having the idea of like, this dog's not going to be a puppy, it's not going to be a blank canvas. There's going to be some stuff going on in his head, and we'll figure out what's going to happen before it comes home. And then when it comes home, we'll be more prepared. But in 99% of cases, it's, hey, Ross, I just adopted this dog last week and he's like escaped the house and he's like tried to kill someone. So could you come help? And I'm like, "Ugh, yeah, okay, let's try taking us back a little bit and let's see what we can do to, like retroactively fix this. But sure, I'll come in as an intervention case. Again, it's just another example of people don't really know what they're getting into with these dogs, but it pays the bills, doesn't it? The 3-3-3 rule, I don't mind that much. I don't think it's incredibly accurate as such. I think it's just another one of these. Uh, it's another one of these concepts that gets thrown around, and like people will mention it to me. They said, "Ross, we're trying the 3-3-3 rule," and I go, "Okay, that's good. I like that you're trying something. I don't know how effective it's going to be because I mean, I like that you're giving the dog time to decompress, but just a very vague term that doesn't lend itself to much other than giving the dog time to chill out. So I like that concept of it, but I just don't think it allows for much else. So I don't hate it, but I also don't want people um, living by it like it's the Bible. You know what I mean? There's going to be a
Mm.
lot more to that, and you could you could have a dog that doesn't need to live by any of that nonsense. It totally depends on the individual dog. It's one of these concepts. It might apply to some dogs. It might apply to others. It might be more helpful for some dogs. It might be more helpful to others. It just totally depends on the dog. I think as long as we're given the dog time to decompress, 100%, I'm happy with that. Let's see what else we can start doing as well. Don't, and I think the problem with the 3-3-3 rule is it, it's like, it almost absolves the owner of any responsibility to put the dog through any stress, which is
Mm.
my problem with it. It's like, "Oh, she just needs 3 months to sleep." I'm like, "No," because then when you start taking the dog out, it's not seen the world, so, like, for sure, let's give the dog time to decompress. But let's also start showing it things it's maybe not too certain of, and let's maybe start trying to build a little bit of resilience there. Let's maybe start teaching the dog a few things. Let's maybe start building a relationship with the dog. Let's start pushing this rescue dog into harder and harder situations. Um, but again, that's a harder concept to sell than just the 3-3-3. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's usually what I need to say to them anyway.
I,
Um,
I, I guess I tend to use the 3-3-3 as just kind of giving people a little bit of a guideline.
Yeah.
So I used to be heavily into rescue some years back, and we would just have dogs delivered on like a bi-weekly basis
Mm,
almost for fostering, and some of them had severe behavioral issues that we did some rehabilitation work with and that kind of stuff. But generally, if I had a very fearful dog come into my house, the first 3 days, I didn't even look at them.
yeah.
I just kind of walked around. If they showed any interest in me, I dropped some food on the ground and then
Mm,
I walked away. Like I didn't put any pressure on them. Now, the big one for me is the 3 weeks one because that's where you tend to see severe behavioral
mhm,
issues. That's when you tend to see the dogs resource guarding couches and stuff,
mhm,
especially if they've had full freedom for a
mhm,
long time. But then the 3 months one, the dog's settled. Yeah, that's kind of just what it is. But
mhm.
it is interesting because it is a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because you kind of like people get hung up in it and they use it as an excuse, which I think is the same as the my dog's been abused. That is just an
Yeah.
excuse to not do anything with your dog.
Mhm,
And you're
mhm,
like, no, no, no. It's like at the rate that people are telling me that dogs have been abused, it's like half of dogs in Australia have had the shit beaten out of them on a daily basis. And I
mhm.
do not believe for a second that that's
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
Now, you could argue that maybe not socializing them, not taking them out, not doing anything with them
Mhm.
is a form of abuse. But
Yep.
as in like people laying into dogs, I do not think that is as frequent of a problem as people think it is.
Yep.
But yeah, sorry, continue on. I just had to throw my 333 cents in.
I think with the idea of the abuse is people don't know how to make sense of dogs' behavior, so they just go, "Ah, well, she must have been abused." Well, she doesn't like guys wearing hats, so a guy who was wearing a big hat must have hit her one day. And I need to. It sounds bad. I don't want to be like, "Do you really think that happened? Like, is that actually like feasible in your head? Do you have like guys in top hats showing up to your house often, or was it just that one dog's house?" Like, and then people start to go, "Oh, but why else would she be reacting like this?" And I have to be like, "Well, she's just learned that this is the most, in her eyes, this is the most appropriate way to respond to this weird thing." And like a guy wearing a hat might be an odd silhouette. But because she has a little bit of nerve and because she has a previous history of reacting to those things, she thinks it's the best way to send that threat away. It doesn't necessarily mean there's been a sign of abuse. For sure, there are abuse cases and dogs can react badly to that. But again, to me, from what I've seen here, it's very, very rare. And I do get the same thing. Like I often hear she must have been abused by a man or kids or something like that. I mean, even Odie, my first dog, he was terrible around kids, as you've seen from the scars on my hand. He wasn't abused by kids. He was just unsure around kids, and he had figured out that the best way to deal with that was through biting. He was never abused by them, though.
Yeah, and I guess one of my favorite things is the good old umbrella. I presume you use them quite a bit in
Oh, yeah.
Scotland, but
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Quite frequently,
but yeah,
actually.
you unfold an umbrella and the dog loses his shit, and people like he must have been beaten with an umbrella. I'm like, no, he's probably just never seen one. And then suddenly this thing, thin, skinny thing, just flips out
Mhm.
into this massive overarching. And what does that look like in the dog's head? I presume something alien and terrifying.
Mhm. Mhm. And that's the thing is like let's take a moment. Let's actually just figure out what how the dog is perceiving this, and then you kind of go, oh well, it's understandable that they would maybe have that reaction, especially if they're not a totally bomb-proof dog. You know, especially genetically, if they are a little bit more nervy, okay, that's fine, 100%. But the answer, just like we talked about with puppy socialization, is not just to never let the dog see an umbrella. And let's say, for argument's sake, the dog has been abused by an umbrella, it's still not a reason to hide the dog from umbrellas. It's, if anything, is
No.
more reason to somehow socialize that dog around umbrellas. Show the dog that picture more often, so that the dog isn't stuck in that same sort of claustrophobic room of fear. We
Yeah.
can help the dog break out of that by some more gentle exposure, by again proving to the dog that there's nothing to be scared of. However, if we're constantly shielding that dog away from that because of some alleged form of abuse that probably never actually took place. As bad as that sounds, but we're being honest, it probably didn't take place. But if we just shield the dog away from that, then that fear, it becomes so much stronger and it becomes like the boogeyman in the corner. And you've
Mm.
now created more fear out of something that the dog was initially just a bit unsure about. But I'm joking, but like in all seriousness, I have had to have a couple of sessions where I just open and close an umbrella a few times.
Yeah.
Usually the dog's fine after it, and then I have to have a moment where I'm like to the owners, "Told you, like she wasn't abused by an umbrella. She just wasn't really sure about this. That's all it is. She just needed to see it a little bit more often."
And I think the 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 one of the big things that a lot of people have trouble wrapping their heads around is if your dog's weird around umbrellas and you become weird around umbrellas, the dog goes like, "Holy shit, umbrellas really are a bad thing."
Mhm, mhm,
Whereas if you just kind of had that dog on a leash, you sat down next to an umbrella and go like, "Hey, look at it. Don't worry
mhm,
about it. I might give you a treat. I might tell you you're a good girl or a good boy, depending on what kind of dog you are." And suddenly the dog's like, "Oh, you're not scared of this." But I think people, you know how we talk about like dogs become like their owners?
mhm,
I think that goes two ways. I think
mhm,
owners also become like their dogs, especially
mhm,
if they're dealing with anxious, fearful, or reactive slash aggressive dogs. They just feed the dog everything that it doesn't need to be fed
mhm.
because they're freaking out about the dog's behavior.
Yeah.
And I totally understand it from like a conceptual point of view, because if you don't understand behavioral science and you see a dog baring its teeth, like you are most likely going to overreact to that. Or if you're not overreacting to it, you're going to react in a really bad way to it potentially.
Yeah.
How some
Exactly.
people try to shut aggression down by meeting aggression with aggression. And you're
Mhm,
like, yeah, that is a slippery slope, especially in an older dog that might have had effective learning through aggression.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, Actually, on the topic of that, just something that popped into my head. But one of my favorite things to discuss is the idea that you can never punish a growl.
Mm,
Now, that is a very nuanced conversation that people on social media, particularly, tend to make very non nuanced by either saying absolutely yes or absolutely no. So, what are your
mhm.
thoughts on punishing a growl, and what situation would you stay away from or consider it?
I typically classify a growl into two separate classifications. So you get a defensive growl and an offensive growl. Now, a defensive growl is more coming from a dog that's a little bit unsure about a situation, is maybe being put into an uncomfortable position and is essentially just trying to communicate that it's a little bit unhappy about this. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's immediately going to lead further up the scale of aggression, although it potentially could. However, in a defensive growl, it's much less likely to happen because it's coming more from a place of insecurity, whereas essentially just trying to communicate something is a little bit off about this, and I would rather not deal with this. So in a situation like that, that could be something like maybe a dog that is being a this dog that's lying comfortable in its bed, it's just sleeping, and it's being approached by an excitable toddler. You know what I mean? The toddler doesn't know any better, is running right up towards the dog. If my dog growls at the toddler at that point, I'm probably not going to do a whole lot to the dog. I'm probably going to remove the toddler at that situation. Now, again, there's even nuance in that, like, depends on my dog's previous history with any form of aggression. But, like, in most instances, I'm sort of like, yep, fair enough. That wasn't really an ideal situation for anyone. That to me isn't necessarily going to create any hard feelings towards the toddler. If it does, then we maybe need to start looking into dealing with that as a more offensive growl. Now, an offensive growl is much more, I think that's what everyone thinks a growl is. An offensive growl is something that's much more likely to jump up that ladder of aggression, and we go to like snarling and biting and lunging. Um, Offensive growls, I'm much more likely to punish simply because I know where you're about to take this behavior and I don't want it to escalate. It's not appropriate for this. And that could be something like, I mean, to even just come back to a similar picture, maybe we're out at a park and a toddler walks past. Now, the toddler isn't interacting with our dog whatsoever. The toddler's minding its own business, it's chasing a ball over there. Our dog just still decides to growl that toddler. I need to show the dog that that wasn't that you misread that situation entirely. This is not going to play out how you think it is. I need to show you that's not appropriate. What I would really like to do is immediately show that dog the exact same picture again. So if the toddler walks
Mm.
past again and there's another growl, and we're like, no, you've misread that again. Stop doing that. Eventually, I want the toddler to walk past, but the dog is now not even displaying that behavior, and I can go see that's the more appropriate behavior in this context because there was no threat to you at that point. You misread it. I read it accurately. You misread it. And I can't have you displaying that behavior when it's not appropriate. However, if we were to differentiate that from the defensive growl, like the toddler was coming straight up to you, had his hands high, was clearly coming into your space, understandable at that point. You were using appropriate communication to send that threat away. That's totally understandable. But in other contexts, it's not. And I think that's where people struggle is
Mm.
understanding when aggression is appropriate. And I think that's another hard conversation is that aggression is actually a very helpful behavior in a lot of contexts. A growl is classified as aggression. And in a lot of contexts, it's appropriate because it's a safekeeping mechanism and dogs will do use it to feel safe. And there's nothing wrong with a dog feeling safe. However, sometimes it bleeds into the wrong situations. And then that's when we can start losing control of a dog because aggression is such a strong functional behavior that it can generalize very, very quickly. And that's where the fear is. But I don't think that's an argument to always punish a defensive growl.
No, and I think even further to confuse the listeners even more about this is if I have a little bit of a nervous, defensive aggressive dog that has escalated to biting, right? So I've had several cases where you have a just poorly put together genetically nervy dog who has growled, has bared its teeth, has escalated to a bite. Now, the first thing I do with that dog is I make them a little bit uncomfortable and I hope that they growl and I will actually reward that.
Mhm.
Because at that point, I would rather you growl at me to say, hey, give me some space rather than just immediately go in for a bite. And
Yeah.
so, and I guess like just to kind of close the loop on this, but there's so much nuance, especially when dealing with behavioral issues like reactivity and aggression, that so many people just trivialize on social media, which is kind of what drives me a little bit nuts. Is like never punish a growl, and never put like a fearful dog in a situation that makes them uncomfortable. Your dog should never experience stress. Blah 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 blah. It's very easy to, I guess, gain social media traction by
Mhm.
throwing out these absurdist statements. But
Mhm.
then, like you were saying before, it just confuses people to the point where they go like, how is it even possible to live with the dog? Because
Yeah.
so much of the information is so absolutist and so conflicting.
Yeah. I actually remember it was a while ago I went to a Chad Mackin workshop. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I went to one of his workshops, and at one point he was talking about how he could never write a dog training book because when it came to the FAQ section at the end of the book, every question on like what should I do if my dog does this or this or this, he said it would be a really shit book because every page would just be it depends, full stop.
Yeah.
Because there's so much nuance to all these problems, and that's just something that's stuck with me for years. There's so much nuance when it comes to these things that, okay, should you punish a growl? People will say no. People will say yes. I'm sat here looking at a phone going, it depends. It depends on
Yeah.
the content. It depends on the dog. It depends on the lifestyle. It depends on the owners. Aggression is so based in context, is so based in genetics and reward history as well. And when I say reward history, I don't necessarily mean treats. I mean, has the dog shown aggression and has been appropriately rewarded for that aggression in some way, not necessarily by the humans giving it something, but by the internal reinforcement of, again, sending a threat away. So you have three elements to aggression is the context of it, the reward history, and the genetics of the dog all need to be taken into account. And when you have such massively differentiating variables, you can't just give one solid answer. And that's stuff
Yeah.
I typically try to avoid on social media. I try to avoid giving those just, if your dog's doing this, just do this, problem solved. Because in most cases, it's not, and I don't, as much as I believe in sometimes punishing some behaviors, I try not to talk about punishment too much online because I don't want to give someone the green light to go and punish something that they shouldn't be punishing. Because as much as we might not want to admit it, punishment can have some fallouts, or at least ineffective, mistimed, non contingent punishment can have massive fallouts. And there's a lot of nuance to it. So I try to avoid giving out that sort of information. However, I wouldn't say like never punish that stuff because there could be a case where maybe using a little bit of punishment is going to solve a big part of that issue. But again, I don't know because it depends.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things that really shit me about social media is when people take a 5-second clip of a trainer doing something with a dog and then talk about how bad it is, and you're like, yeah, but you have no context to say that. Sure,
Mhm.
if it like abuse is abuse. And unfortunately, from time to time, we see actual
Yeah.
abuse by people who call themselves trainers. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. And
Mhm. Mhm.
I do believe that that needs to be called out. It needs to be, not spread for social media clout, but it has to actually be brought up, and someone has to go like, no, this is not dog training. This is bad. But yeah, when I see people like pulling out those 5-second clips where
Mhm.
a trainer is, I don't know, they're like tapping the dog on the nose with a finger and they go like, look, he's
Mhm.
abusing the dog. And you like, you have absolutely no context to
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah. And it's
But
it's sort of
yeah,
like
sorry, go.
situations where the dog has like we can weigh it up if that dog has shown history of aggression or other problematic behaviors. A tap on the nose, is that kind of what we're is that really what we're worried about? That I don't of course, it all depends, and this could be the most abusive trainer on the planet, and if it is straight up abuse, I'll be the first person to say it. But the second time, there's nothing wrong with just having a slightly nuanced conversation, looking at what else is going on, and making a decision at that point. However, that's just a larger problem with social media where nobody wants to watch a video that's over 1 minute long. So
Yeah,
trainers and other people are kind of forced to condense information, which can then set us up to get picked apart by other people. So it's kind of a loop in and of itself. And then those people that put out the videos that pick apart other trainers, well, their comments get flooded with all the reinforcement of like, oh my God, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. Oh my God, you're so right. And then that trainer wants to keep putting out videos like that as well, which is just, I think, more. And maybe let's say they put out 10 videos calling out abuse, and maybe one video is genuine abuse. The other 9 videos are single-handedly harming the industry as well. So again, incredibly nuanced there as well, and it's always gonna come back to it depends. That's
yeah,
the really, really annoying thing about all this, but nobody wants to hear any form of nuance anymore, unfortunately.
yeah. No, I agree. All right. So now that we've gone down a little bit of a dark rabbit hole, I want to bring it up a little bit again. I want to talk about my all time favorite thing, which is playing with dogs.
Oh, yeah,
Now,
cool.
I know you play with dogs a lot, and that is my primary reinforcer is by far play.
Mhm.
For every treat that I give to a dog, I probably play with them for like 2, 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of circulation in, shall we say, the balanced community where people will often claim that playing with dogs is a fad.
Mm,
And I guess on the force free side of things, they tend to say never play with your dog because we can't control them when they get excitable.
yeah.
And so now, again, we have this kind of absolutism on both sides and no actual sensible conversations being had in the middle. So, talk to us about play. How do you approach play with dogs? Why do you think play is valuable? And in which, I guess, instances would you pick play over food based reward training?
I mean, to actually answer the last question real quick, I would pick it over food 9 times out of 10. If you bring your dog to me and there's not much of a food drive, but your dog's happy to play, like let's build on that. And if your dog plays perfectly well, if your dog plays really, really well in the house, cool. Why are we not playing with the dog outside at parks? Especially if your dog's got some reactivity, is weird about new environments. Well, oh, we've tried taking treats out to the park. Did it work? No. Okay. Have you tried using a toy? No. Okay. Well, let's try using that. Let's bring a tug toy out. Let's bring a flirt pole. And I've had even just massive success with that. Just being like, let's not do anything else. Let's forget about engage, disengage. Let's forget about your markers. God forbid I say like let's forget about markers for a bit. Just go to a park and bring out a toy, play with your dog for 15 minutes, take them back home. I'm not going to say that's going to solve all the issues, but we're working from an internal reinforcement schedule. Reinforcement scheme here, where the dog is feeling good from the inside, not from some sort of external reward in the form of food. I think that is much more beneficial for dogs in the long run, even just in the context of building confidence. Because in our play, and this is something I try to teach people, it's not just a case of throwing a ball. You want to bring some level of competitiveness out. You want to adhere to some rules. And the way I always look at it, the way I explain it to clients is my play isn't just throwing a ball, it's like a sport. It's like going out and playing football. It's like going out and playing basketball. And again, it's about taking that abstract idea and putting it into human terms. And that there's nothing really productive about running onto the pitch, picking up the football with your hands and running towards the goal and then throwing it in the goal. Nobody's going to be happy with yourself. You might think you've won, but you actually haven't won because you haven't played as a team member. You've just kind of cheated. And nobody's going to want to play with you if you do that. So if I go and pick up the ball with my hands and throw it into the goal, I'm going to get a yellow card or I'm going to get sent off. You know what I mean? I'm not going to be allowed to continue the game. And what I try to explain to people, whether it's football, basketball, whether it's Monopoly, there are rules to play by. And ironically, playing within those rules is what makes it more interesting. This is also how I go about explaining the idea of consequences to owners as well. Is that a consequence isn't always just stringing your dog up or throwing it against the wall or screaming and shouting at it. A consequence can be, oh, you've just messed up in this game. You now don't get to gain access to this toy for 5 seconds. And the dog's a bit like, shit, that sucks. But I understand why that happened. I'm going to get access to the toy. I can bounce back. And so there, within play, by adding in consequences, we actually make the idea of consequences quite fun. We make the game a little bit more, we add a little bit more spice to the game, as opposed to just throwing a ball. When the dog doesn't bring it back, we go, yeah, oh well. You know, by by us adding rules and consequences and making sure that we're playing by the same consequences as well and playing by the same rules, the dog starts to understand that we're just as involved in this game as they are. And that's what makes the big difference, because now we're competitive, but we're also playing as a team.
Mhm.
And if you can start taking your dog out into situations where they're a little bit nervous or if they're a little bit hyperactive, we can use those rules to keep them focused and also to work them in those states where they do start to get to a level of over arousal. And it's okay to bring them back down. If that means using a little bit of consequences in their play, then that's fine. And consequences can be positive and negative, and you want to be using both of those in your play. And if you have that as a really, really strong system, you can take that anywhere. And your dog not only is not going to be bothered about the environment around them, but it's going to massively build your relationship with them as well. Because let's be honest, a walk around the block is fine, but you don't see wolves just walking around on cement their entire life. They go out and do stuff, they explore, they separate away from each other and they come back and then they hunt for their food and then they play. It's innate for them to want to explore and then come back and play. But owners are often forgetting about that with their dogs. And I remember, especially when I had Hendrix, I wasn't a trainer as such at this point. He was still just a puppy. I didn't know about play based training at all. I barely knew about food based training. I just knew Caesar Milan corrections. That's kind of all I knew, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I remember him being a collie, being quite energetic, my priority with him was always just take him to the park and play with him. And I had very rarely have ever had any issues with him. You know, he was never, we got some collieisms. We had some herding of the kids. We had a little bit of resource guarding, but just through, I guess, what is now play based training, which was me just playing with my dog every single day, he overcame a lot of those issues more or less by himself because of the underlying systems that we're getting worked on through our play. It wasn't conscious on my part. It was just something I did. And it's still something I do to this day with dogs, maybe with a little bit more thought involved as to what I'm teaching and how I go about teaching that to the owners. But for sure, I always, with every dog I get in, I try to see where their play is currently at and how we can go about improving that to the point where I can just play with that dog in any circumstance. And if we can do that with a dog, if we can have the dog playing around something that triggers them, perhaps if we're dealing with reactivity, I always say if the dog can play around that trigger, it's no longer a trigger because the dog has to be in a vulnerable state. The dog has to feel happy and content and comfortable in order to play. So it becomes a good gauge of temperament at that point as well, whilst also essentially being a good level of counter conditioning in those circumstances.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think like a couple of things that I want to touch on there that I thought was really good is when you're playing with a dog, when you're doing activities in a high state of arousal, that is actually the perfect point in which to introduce aversive consequences because the dog
Mhm.
is so much more forgiving. So
Yeah.
even if you introduce some form of punishment in that state of mind, I guess, the dog is already so much more resilient. Whereas if you're just doing click feed, click feed, click feed, and then suddenly you correct the dog on a slip lead, the impact of the dog is going to be so much bigger than when they're in a heightened state of arousal. They're kind of fucking punching on with you. They're
Mhm.
tugging on the, tugging on the toy, having a good time. So
Mhm.
that is actually a better point at which to, in my opinion, introduce punishment
Yeah.
than in a low state of arousal. But
Mhm.
I'm playing around with this idea at the moment of being a particip free when you're playing with a dog. So what a lot of people have trouble wrapping their heads around is when you're playing with a dog, you have to both be a participant, but you also have to be the referee.
Yeah.
So you have to be a volunteering participant that
Mhm.
enjoys the game, that fights back with the dog, that pushes and pulls when the dog pushes and pulls, kind of thing. But you also have to be the referee that then gives a timeout and stops the game
Yeah.
if the dog makes a mistake, right? And
Yeah.
that's the best way to teach rules around play.
Mhm.
So, how would you like how do you begin instructing people in how to actually play in a productive manner with their dogs, I guess? And do you tend to focus more on possession games like tug, or is it the catch and chase? I mean, that's up to the dog kind of what they're into, but do you teach both or do you separate them? How do you go about actually teaching people how to play with their dogs, I guess?
I typically like to I typically prefer possession games. I think there's a lot more going on there when it comes to, again, those underlying systems and drive capping. I think there's a lot you can do in possession games, and I think when you do that stuff right, you can really, really do it right. There's been and most dogs, I play possession games to a certain extent. Obviously, I'm still trying to teach owners here, and you can get really deep in the woods with that sort of stuff. And we can talk about like correct presentation. We can talk about parading the dog, and we can talk about the amount of time you want to do that, and then obviously outing the dog as well. The main sort of principles I try and just cover for owners is one, stop putting so much obedience into your play. The amount of times owners bring out the toy and start immediately asking for a sit. Like, no, you've already ruined the game, so let's completely restart that. This is your dog's opportunity to be a bit of a dick. Like, they've been a dick for 3 years at this point. You've tried telling them no, this is their time to, you can let them be a little bit of a dick. And we'll worry about telling them off later. But early on, there's not, this is the opportunity for the dog to express itself. And so if you have a dog that wants to jump up and grab the toy, you can let them do that. You can, and you can almost actively encourage them. And that in itself is, a bit strange for a lot of owners because they're so used to overly controlling their dog, or they're scared about letting their dog get to that state of arousal. And again, that's understandable, but I need to try and um, reassure them this is a big part of the process, is that your dog has this innate state of arousal that it likes to go into. We can't just suppress that the dog's entire life. There will be elements of his life where we do suppress that. It's going to have to come out somewhere. And your play has to be top notch in order for that to come out. So forget your obedience for just now. We'll come back to that. Don't even worry about teaching the dog and out. We'll just get two identical toys and we'll just switch it. It's much less conflict for the dog, and we're not going to have to be nagging the dog to out. We want to create a little bit of cooperation. Like I said, we can be the referee, but we also need to be a participant in it as well. I really like that analogy as well. I'm going to start using that. But it's this concept of stop asking for your dog so much in the early stages. Just allow your dog to have fun. Once we see the dog's got a really good motivation for that play, then we can start asking for some breaks in the play where we'll maybe teach it out, and then we'll ask for a sit. And then maybe we'll start really slowing the dog down. We'll ask for a heel or maybe even something like place. And I think the owners actually start to enjoy it at that point because they start to see the challenge. So dog outs, I say, okay, send the dog to place. And the dog doesn't quite do it, but the dog wants to. And I need to coach the owners and say, no, 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 this is going to be really worthwhile. Send the dog to place. As soon as that dog touches place, we release the dog to come and get the toy. And I think the owners and the dogs like it because there's small consequences. There's also immediate satisfaction. And that's something people have struggled to get with their dog when they've been walking down the street and that sausage dog has walked past and has barked at them. They struggle to give the dog feedback and for the dog to listen. So when they start working with that dog, with their own dog in a high state of arousal, and the dog's actually fucking listening, they're over the moon. And I'm like, yeah, this is ideal. This is why we want to start doing it in different places, because you've now essentially taught a core concept to the dog of listening and being well mannered, even in high states of arousal. And we can essentially switch the dog on, but also switch the dog off. And that is what most owners really, really struggle with, especially when we start looking at our working breeds or high energy breeds, the ones that are a bit more prone to reactivity.
Uh, yes, absolutely. And again, it's funny you should bring up the breed thing because for every oodle cross that I see, I probably see 150 German Shepherds.
Yeah. Yeah.
And look, that could be because I have a Malinois, because I
Mhm.
do post a lot of our shepherds and stuff. But at the end of the day, most people struggle with working dogs, and they struggle with them because they are working dogs and they require a little bit more than what the average dog owner already knows to begin with. But you did mention one thing there, which I want to delve a little bit deeper into because this is such an important thing to me. And one thing that I find people, even like both dog owners, but also students, tend to struggle a little bit with in the early stages, and that is drive capping.
Mhm.
So, teaching the dog to go up in arousal, go into drive, and then kind of pulling themselves out of that drive and into a thinking state of mind. Like, that is such an invaluable thing, especially for working dogs. So, I guess, how do you begin if you have an out of control super drivey German Shepherd that just bites the shit out of everything, will run after balls for 5 hours on end? Where do you begin introducing the drive capping? And do you do it with tools? Do you do it with markers? Do you like, how do you begin the process of capping that drive, I guess?
Honestly, the first place I teach it is maybe not so much the out, because there can be some difficulties with that. So I usually start with um something like a switch where the dog can just learn to sort of let go of an object to come after the new one. Now that's not drive capping because the dog still stays in that state of arousal. However, if I can get the dog to switch, I can quickly ask the dog to just give me some sort of obedience behavior that I know the dog already knows. A sit. Something as simple as that. Once that dog sits for a second, I'll release them to go get the toy. What I also then start to do is at the end of the game, I always make sure I have it all done. And that's a big thing for me as well. I teach that to every single dog. So the dog's learned a little bit of like, I can drop this thing and I can swap and get that. That's not necessarily your drive capping, but it's putting the dog into a slightly more cognitive place. And there needs to be some level of cooperation. The drive capping comes at the end where I can essentially say, we are now done doing this. We're going to do something else. And the dog will probably be on some sort of line at that point. As to tools, I'll probably just have the dog on a flat collar because I don't need much more than that. Because I almost want a little bit of a struggle from the dog. When I drop that toy on the ground and I say all done, if the dog just comes with me, I'm like, okay, you've clearly not learned anything there. I want to drop that toy on the ground. I want to say all done. And I want to see the dog still pushing for that toy and me just putting a little bit of backward pressure on that line and just walking away and them dealing with that emotion of not getting through to it. Then
Mm.
after we have that idea of we stop when I say stop, our next few play sessions are going to be a little bit more in depth on our drive capping, where I'll probably keep the line on throughout I'll probably utilize the line in our play where hopefully I'm using something like a tug, chasing the dog round, dog's chasing me, might ask for an out at that point, and then I might start utilizing a little bit of pressure on the dog at that point. The dog again is going to experience the same struggle of like, I don't want to do this. I want to really keep a hold of this. But once that dog outs for a split second, immediately back onto the toy. And so I just have these small little moments where I just ask for a little bit of something. If the dog shows me the appropriate behavior, let them back onto the toy. Eventually, once the dog has a clear understanding of that, I'll start asking for more, start asking for longer durations. I'll start, like I said, sending the dog to play, start putting the dog into a down, start asking for more complex behaviors, and really, really starting to see if I can get the dog to really come right back down and then shooting the dog back up. Now, I think when we do this right, you start to see the dog actually really enjoys this process because the capping in itself is a challenge. The dog starts to understand that through slowing down, they can amp back up again. But also, all done means all done. And you can teach all this stuff, like I said, really, really quickly because you have such a strong motivator in the dog that just implementing a few rules and boundaries, the dog recovers so quickly if we do use any pressure or do use any sort of aversive aversive consequences at that point. It's a really, really easy thing to teach dogs, but the owners need to be prepared to get into some of those difficult situations with the dog where it's not necessarily like the dog's going to like redirect and bite them, but we need to have a couple of small conversations with the dog where we say, nope, we're done with this toy, or nope, sit means sit. No matter how much you protest, I'm going to make sure you sit. But when you do perform this more calm behavior, you'll get immediate access back to that toy. And then we can start playing around with that idea of immediate satisfaction from a behavior we've just liked.
Yeah, and I think another thing with play as well, which I do get that people get a little bit scared of it, especially if they have a drivey dog. They're like, "What, you want to make my dog more crazy?" But
Hmm.
at the same time, you kind of have to explain to them that actually when this is going to satisfy the dog more, number one. So we're going to get a little bit of that drive out of the dog's system. But also, one thing that I find is dogs are so much more forgiving when they're in a drivey state than when they're in a low arousal state, right? So if you're doing your click and treat, like there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But if you have a super intense drivey dog and you push that dog into a state of high arousal, you can fuck up really badly and the dog's still going to forgive you. In that low state of arousal, you make a big mistake. That is actually a setback for a lot of dogs.
Yeah.
And so that, like, but again, like you said, up in arousal, switch off. When I say, finished, we walk away. The toy is not accessible to you
Mhm.
anymore. And I think another thing that you said as well that is really important is like drive. In a dog that has out of control drive, there is no there is no room for cognition. And
Mhm.
then what we kind of try and do is we maybe, even if we introduce a little bit of pressure to teach an out or to when the dog outs to push them into a sit, what we're doing is we're actually getting a cognition over drive where like the thinking brain actually takes over the lizard brain in the dog,
Mhm, mhm.
and that is beyond valuable. And I don't think people understand exactly how valuable that is, because that is night and day,
Yeah.
especially when working with high drive dogs.
Yeah, this is the thing. I think one thing that every owner should know, regardless of what dog you've got, every owner needs to know that just training your dog in low arousal when they're calm is not going to do you a whole lot of good when your dog starts to get excited, because they've only learned those skills when they're calm. Of course, it's easy to teach a dog to do something when they're calm. Can you teach the dog to do that same thing when they're excited? Is it going to be more difficult? 100%. But that's where it pays off, because your dog is going to naturally go into states where they get excited, where they go into high arousal. All that calmness training you've done before is not, quite frankly, going to be useful in those situations, because the dog's never learned to deal with these emotions, these high arousal emotions. It's only ever learned to deal with it when it's calm. And so we do deliberately need to put these dogs into high arousal and teach them how to listen in high arousal. I think that's one of the biggest skills any pet owner can learn. And the great thing is, you can teach it all through play.
Yeah.
You can teach it all through play. It's not even necessarily hard to do. It takes a certain level of preparation on the owner's part and thoughtfulness into your play. But that's why I say a lot of time, like, let's just start playing with the dog and let's see what happens. Can we kick the dog into another gear? Fantastic. Can we bring the dog back down? Nice. Now your dog's got a whole new skill set. So you're calm, loose leash walking, fantastic. But now your dog also knows how to come back out of that state of arousal, so that when they start seeing that dog across the street and they start feeling all those emotions, it starts to resemble how they were feeling in play. And then whether we need to cue it or not, even better if they do it by themselves, but we can just say, like, "Hey, bud, not now. We're not doing this now." And he's going to come back down. And now we've not even necessarily had to use any sort of reinforcement. We've not really had to use much pressure either. The dog is starting to learn to regulate their own emotions around something that excites them. And if we only do that around calm stimuli, or if we only do it when the dog's calm, they don't get to experience that sort of fluctuation, and that internal fluctuation with their emotions. They don't get to experience that. They don't get to play around with those emotions. Whereas we can do that all around play if we have a dog that is willing to engage and get into a high state of arousal. And if we have an owner that's willing to let their dog get to that place, even if it does take a bit of reassurance from the trainer as well, it's a massively important skill and it pays off huge, not just in the reactivity side of things or resource guarding or aggression, pays off massively in the dog's ability to cope with life in general.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's really interesting because one thing just popped into my head. So one of my best friends in Norway is an ex-paratrooper. Like he's a, like super high level military guy. And it was funny because he told me about this exercise that they had to do where they
Mhm.
had to assemble and disassemble a rifle in their underwear while bombs are going off around them.
Mm.
And you
Uh-huh.
kind of like, if you can concentrate really hard under that level of pressure from the outside, you're going to be able to withstand pretty much everything.
So do you also think I mean, you could like make a one-to-one comparison to box feeding in dogs with that.
Mm.
Sort of like a similar idea, isn't it? Is that you're taught to focus on one thing regardless of what's going on around you. Sort of like the same idea, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a perfect example actually. And for anyone who doesn't know what box feeding is, check out the Canine Paradigm episode 4, I think. That's when they talk about box feeding, but invaluable tool if you know how to actually use it properly. Um, cool. So I want to talk about one more thing before I let you go. I know we've been talking for an hour and 45, and I
Mhm.
appreciate all the time that you've given, but this has been an amazing conversation. But I did see you talk about what you call the iPad dog.
Mhm.
And you also talk a lot about the value of sleep, diet, and lifestyle. And I just want you, this is not something that's talked about very often. And I am keen to get your take on it and why I guess you think it's such a valuable thing. And in what situations would you focus on things like lifestyle? Obviously, the dog has to have an appropriate lifestyle, but little things like sleep and diet is something you don't hear a lot about from trainers. So, give us a little bit of an insight into what's happening in your head there.
The problem is that sleep and diet play such a massive role in our dog's behavior, but owners are too busy focusing on the outward display of the behavior or even the triggers that's caused that behavior. Nobody really thinks about a few hours before that. What was the dog eating? What was the dog's sleep like? And again, like I always, again, quite an abstract idea. So what I always say to owners is, what are you like on 4 hours of sleep when you've got a meeting the next day? You're probably not your best self. You're probably a bit more agitated than normal. You're probably a little bit more prone to stress. You, same thing with um, your diet as well, because I know like the other day I'd had a long day. Loads of dogs worked. It was like 8 o'clock in the evening. I did not have time to come home and make myself dinner. That's a lie. I did have time to make dinner, but I was too lazy. So I went to KFC thinking this is going to be a great idea. I could really go to KFC. 2 hours later, I felt like shit. I only had myself to blame because I gave myself a shit diet. And it happens every single time. So I'm clearly not learning from that. Right. But thing is, though, that can then directly impact my sleep as well. So now I'm totally out of balance. And then that's going to affect my day to day mood the day after. And it's why you hear all these things, especially in the fitness industry. Get 8 hours of sleep, get a proper amount of protein, carbohydrates, don't eat shit, just live like that. Everything else is going to get a lot better. They're not even talking about what weights to lift. They're not talking about what exercises you should do. But everyone tends to understand, yeah, that's a really important part of a healthy lifestyle. And yet, for some reason, we forget about it with dogs. And then I think the flip side to that is we see dogs that do get agitated, they get stressed. And quite often, our solution is to be like, oh, well, they clearly need more stimulation. And so the Likimats come out, the little puzzle toys start to come out. And now we're actually making the problem worse because we're keeping a stressed out, overtired, overstimulated dog in a constant state of seeking some form of reinforcement.
Or
And
dopamine,
then
I
we really
guess.
struggle with emotional regulation at that point because the dog is just, its day to day life is just constant stimulation. That's where the idea of the iPad dog comes from. Because unfortunately, it's happening with kids. It's been happening with kids for a while because they're constantly on their screens and they can't. I mean, you've probably seen it on a plane. The mum goes to take the iPad away and the kid freaks out. It can't deal with being told no because how it's never been subject to that before. It's never been subject to taking something away from it and not understanding that the world is going to be fine.
Mm.
It creates a massive meltdown because it's almost, whether it's the child or the dog, has become reliant on a constant source of stimulation. And of course, that's then going to bleed into other forms, again, whether we're talking about kids or dogs, is going to bleed into other forms of behavioral issues further down the line. It's just a matter of time when that happens.
Mm. And I think what a lot of people don't understand about things like iPads and that like or screens in general, touch screens, social media, whatever it may be, is these things are designed to give you constant dopamine hits. And
Mhm,
dopamine, for those who don't know, is the seeking system. So
mhm,
essentially, whenever you're looking for something, whenever you're pushing yourself out of the couch to go and look for something, that is dopamine driving that in your head. And cheap dopamine, which is I read this book called Dopamine Nation, and
mhm,
I don't know if you've read it. It's fucking fantastic. Like I read it in 2 days. I couldn't put it away, and I was hoping to get the author onto the podcast. I haven't
mhm,
been able to yet, but I might have to talk about it at some point. But the way that life is designed now is to never be bored. It is never to have a second to think about anything. It is flashing lights, and the things that create the dopamine addiction are things like gaming, it's shitty food, it's alcohol, it's uh, porn. Like there are so many things, but it's always just cheap dopamine to keep the brain firing all the time. And I see so many dogs, like you were talking about the Likimats and everything. I see so many dogs that are frantic,
Mhm.
anxious because
Mhm.
they have never been told, they've never been tethered, they've never been told, hey, sit in the corner and do nothing,
Yeah.
essentially. So they have no ability to cope with boredom.
Yeah.
And teaching, like I get this question so often. Like people message me or they call me and they say, hey, Stian, what would you say is the hardest thing to teach a dog to do? And I always say the same thing. It's easy, is to do absolutely fucking nothing.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
teaching a dog to do something is so easy, but
Yeah.
teaching them to just sit, lie down, be relaxed, be content is where things fall apart. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, so I guess like, where would you begin breaking through to an iPad dog?
I mean, as first thing is explain to the owners, like, we need to really cut back on all this stuff that you're giving to your dog. I see dogs all the time, they just have a bucket of toys in the corner, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if your dog has free access to toys, of course, it's just like a constantly charged iPad. It can just go over whenever it wants, whenever it needs that. The dog will feel bored for a split second and then go and seek some form of reinforcement, whether it's the toy or, and then that could obviously lead to like barking at the window, jumping on us. So we need to realize where all these problems are coming from. Your dog has just got way too much going on. It could be the bucket of toys, the licky mat that it gets 3 times a day, the snuffle mat that it gets after every single walk, because the dog gets a case of the zoomies, so we need to give it something else. What I always say to the owners is, "Oh, oh, but she really enjoys that." I'm like, well, we don't know that for a fact. It could just be causing more frustration, but again, that's a separate case entirely. But I always say it's like this is just another life skill that your dog needs to learn, because your dog is not feasibly going to be constantly entertained, and we're already running into issues with it because your dog is looking for constant entertainment. And so again, I love my analogies. What I always say is huge important life skill for a dog is to be bored in the same way that it is for humans. I can distinctly remember all of like my aunties and uncles' weddings that I had to go to when I was like 9 years old, 10 years old. I had to sit there in like a really uncomfortable shirt and a tie that I didn't like wearing. And I would rather be anywhere else in the world. I'd rather be at home playing GTA on my Xbox, but I just was not allowed to. And I would moan and complain, and my mum would just be like, "No, you just have to sit there." I'd be like, "This fucking sucks." And she would be like, "Yeah, it does. This is a part of life. Get used to it." And I would sit there and I would strop and I would moan, and I would eventually maybe go get ice cream after it, but in most cases, probably not, because mom and dad would lie to me. But either way, I still learned to just sit and be bored, and that's perfectly okay. And now, as a functioning adult, I can go to these things, weddings I still don't want to go to, and I'm still okay to just sit and be bored. And I don't have to scroll through TikTok or Instagram in order to keep me entertained. But I think that's starting to become a bit of a lost skill nowadays. But I apply the exact same concepts to owners, and that if your dog is constantly seeking stimulation, best way to do it, take out all the stimulation, go cold turkey. We're going to put the dog we're going to give the dog a bed, we're going to tether it. Oh, should we bring out any food? No, because food is just another form of reinforcement. Your dog's going to have to sit there and be bored, and you're going to have to go through it. And it might involve 20 minutes of whining. So be it. The next day it'll be 15 minutes of whining, 10 minutes of whining. Before you know it, the dog's going back and choosing the bed by itself, because this is the other thing owners need to recognize: relaxation is an inherent form of reinforcement as well. It just takes time to get there. It's like coming back after that long day and not going on your phone and just sitting on your couch or your bed and doing that. It just feels good. The exact same thing for owners. So when I'm with the owners and we see that dog take that big deep breath, I'm like, cool, we've got there now. Your dog has just finally learned that relaxation is also a good option. Now fucking bin those Likimats. You know what I mean? Get those. They're gone. I never want to see a single one of those in my life ever again. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
When
no,
did
that's fair
Likimats
enough.
become like the new version of like sniffing a blade of grass? Like, what?
Yeah.
I've
I
got a
think
personal vendetta against these things, honestly. They're good in some situations, but massively overused. Whoever made
Uh,
Likimats is making mad profit just now, so good for them, but it's
oh,
not good
look,
run.
look, I wish I had the idea, but yeah, I'm not going to say that it benefits dogs in any way, form, or shape.
No,
But
no, I wouldn't say so.
I think one thing that you said there is really important to reiterate because this is something a lot of people are going to have trouble wrapping their heads around. But the fact that relaxing is inherently reinforcing. And I I've had multiple people contact me and they say that like, "Hey, we've got a problem with our dog." And I say, "Okay, what's the problem?" And they're like, "I think my dog is bored." And I say,
Yeah.
"What do you mean by that?"
Mhm.
And they say, "Well, when I go to work, the dog's in the backyard and they just lie down and sleep all day." And the analogy that I like to use to them is like, "Hey, in a wolf pack, when the dogs feel, sorry, when the wolves feel safe, they are fed and they are content. What do you think they do? They fucking sleep.
Mhm.
They don't pace around picking up sticks to throw at their little like wolf cubs. They just go like, "Hey, life is good. Now it's time to relax." And yeah, I think no, I read that you talking about sleep, and I just kind of went like, "Hey, never really thought about that." But we teach a lot of relaxation protocols, for lack of a better word. But you like sometimes the dog just needs to be tied up and told like, "Hey, how about we do nothing for some time?"
Yeah. And
And
then
that is hard work, but it's
yeah,
important
people
work.
will see the struggle and they'll see the dog whine, and then they're so quick to give up. But all we've done is then reinforce the opposite. We just reinforce the dog whining and demanding that they get let free. And so then the problem becomes even worse. So again, to even like come back to our first point, this is where you can start building a bit of stress. Yeah, this is
Mm,
going to suck for a bit, but you'll be fine in like 30 minutes. You just need to settle down. Once you settle down, we can go do something else, but you need to go through this just now, as opposed to making it the boogeyman and just putting it off for months or years. And then you've got a 3-year-old dog that can't relax and is never relaxed and is being at daycare every single week and then come home and got licky mats. Now you try and get that dog to relax. You've made your job a lot harder and you've made your dog a lot less tolerant to that form of stress.
And I think another thing that people forget about is a dog that's pacing around the house, sniffing, picking up things, walking, 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 barking at birds. That dog is stressed as
Yeah.
fucking shit,
Yes.
right? People
Yes.
think that that is happiness, but you're like, no, that is a dog going like, I'm dying to sleep, but I don't actually know how to lie down and do nothing.
Yeah, yeah, and I actually almost kind of feel sorry for the dogs at that point because maybe if it's an in-home session, the dog will come running up to me, and I can see the pinned back ears, like the really wide smile. I can see their eyes, and their pupils are dilated, like they've been sniffing something in the toilet. You know what I mean? They've been having a real good time. Like whatever the hell you're on. But I'm like, we need to bring you off of it because you are on just a different planet just now. But they see that as happiness. They see it. They confuse excitement with happiness. They confuse stress with happiness, and then these are the same people. Again, they don't know any better, so it's our job to inform them. But they will say, "My dog looks sad. My dog looks bored." And I'm like, no, your dog's perfectly content right now. This is actually very good. This is actually a lot of progress. This is exactly what we're looking for. Um,
Yep.
but sometimes it can be quite difficult to get that through to people. There's definitely a gap in knowledge there in terms of what dogs should be like in the house, and not constantly seeking stimulation, but just like chilling at your feet can actually be a big behavioral milestone for a lot of dogs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's why I started the podcast. It's just to kind of be able to have these conversations and actually be able to look at the nuance without the social media kind of flashing
Mm.
ideas of absolutism in your head. It's actually to
Yeah,
sit down and go like, hey, let's think about this and think about this rationally.
yeah, yeah.
So Mr. Ross. Now, I like to do this thing at the end of our conversations. I know we've been going for nearly 2 hours and I very much appreciate all your time, but I love to do this thing that I call Reddit is retarded.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Love this.
Reddit is probably the best and the worst website at the same time
Mm-hmm.
on the entire internet.
Mm-hmm.
And I have seen some fantastic training advice on Reddit, but I've also seen some of the worst fucking things about dog training in my life on Reddit. So I found this cracker And this, I'm going to read the whole post. Pretty much all the comments, I presume, are going to be very closely related to what you're going to say. So I'm not going to rip on the comments too
Okay.
much. But the actual post itself is quite cracked and quite funny. So I will finish up on that. Now,
Okay.
this is in Puppy 101. Now,
Oh, we're
Puppy
off to a great start
101,
already.
or
I'm on
Puppy
this. I'm
101.
on this one all the time. Okay.
But I want to, it's funny because it's like two sentences that are kind of normal and then it just gets a bit cracked from there. So,
Okay.
headline is new puppy dash panicking exclamation mark.
Okay.
My kids have been wanting a dog, and so have I. My husband doesn't really care for dogs, but he's open to trying. Okay, so this
Mm.
is kind of like a pretty normal conversation at
Mhm.
this point. Now, here
Yep.
we go. We got a 5-month-old Dutch Shepherd mix from a shelter yesterday as a trial.
Nice.
Sh-
We're off to a great start. Oh,
okay,
good. Okay.
it gets worse. She was great. She bit a lot, but just being playful. It's 2:50 a.m. and she has slept all night in her cage so far without crying.
Okay.
However, she peed 4 times and pooped 1 time, all in my bedroom. I'm
Uh,
panicking that I made the wrong choice. We have 3 weeks to decide, but I don't want to take that long, and my kids are getting attached. My husband and I work full time. My kids are young and in sports. Did I just take every single minute of calm and throw it out the window? Is this anxiety a normal feeling less than 24 hours into getting a puppy? And should I not be doing this? So, Ross, do you see this becoming a success story in any way, form, or shape?
I would the optimist in me would love to say yes. The pessimist in me, or just the realist, is like, why did you get a Dutch Shepherd puppy?
Because that is
Why?
pretty much every comment starts with that. Why the fuck did you get a Dutch Shepherd mix?
Yeah. This is again, we as dog trainers, we harp on about this all the time. It kind of doesn't seem to make a difference. Like, research the breed that you're getting. You would very quickly realize if you just Google Dutch Shepherd and you watch the first few videos that come up, you'll quickly realize maybe not the best dog that you want in a household. The dog was biting a bit, that tracks. And the problem is, if you talk to any dog trainer, they're going to be like, "Yeah, she's going to bite. You need to learn to kind of get through that, or at least manage the dog in a way where we can seclude them a bit. We can isolate them so they can't bite, and then also offer opportunities for them to bite. Ideally,
Mhm.
not you, but if you don't give the dog anything else, yeah, it's going to bite things that move. And unfortunately, you move, and I can also guess that your young kids also move. Um,
Yep.
Problem is as well, like we said up front, the husband isn't overly interested, or wasn't overly interested in the dog. I don't imagine he's now suddenly gonna get more interested in this dog now that we're already having these issues, which aren't really issues, these issues less than 24 hours into it. So we're already losing a bit of cooperation there, and then we might start running into these issues where, like, do we even really like the puppy anymore? And again, this is one of these things, like, the puppy's gonna be stressed, mum's gonna be stressed, dad is probably already checked out. Kids are gonna see a young, energetic puppy and want to play with it, but then are gonna quickly learn that playing with this puppy is not fun. And then
Mhm.
that puppy is gonna be deprived in some way because although we like crate training in isolation, that dog is gonna be removed from that family a lot, which is then gonna is increase the frustration, which is then going to only increase the biting, which is then going to then start displacing onto other things. And there's a good chance, especially hopefully the comments got this person right back on track. But we don't want this dog going to, and I say this because I've seen this before as an outlet, daycare. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
We don't want to be
Yeah.
doing that because then what sort of habits is the dog going to be learning just to come back and start practicing those habits outside of that? And so less than 24 hours, yeah, sounds like, that's probably not gonna go well. I would love to see them turn that around. I'm not sure. Can we get them on the call? Is that feasible? Like,
I
could we me and you have a
I
chat?
don't know. I wouldn't even know how to contact them. But look, I did have a read through some of the comments, and they, to be fair, they were all very sensible. And I
Good.
think in the end they decided to take the dog back because
Okay.
like one of the things that I think we talked about at the beginning of this is good dogs don't really end up in shelters. And when a
Yes.
5-month-old puppy ends up in a shelter, it's usually because it's a nuclear bomb with 4 legs.
Yeah.
And it takes a particular kind of person with a particular kind of dedication or someone experienced like a trainer to go like, hey, I want to take on this problem.
Yeah, the thing is like, so the exact issues, that's why I said issues, probably not issues, because the exact things that she mentioned in that post, the things that she does not like about the dog, the things that are causing problems for a completely different type of person, that could be exactly what they're looking for. That could be
For a
exactly what
sport
they're
dog
looking for. Like
trainer,
for
for
a sport
example.
dog trainer, someone is maybe going into some sort of protection work and is looking for that. Now, that's not to say the dog could be perfect, but they could take those um, features of the dog and they could develop it into something really, really nice. However, in that pet household family, they're not going to be able to develop that. They're going to try and crush that dog into something that's not. And it's often like trying to put a square peg into a round hole. It's not going to
Yep.
work. And at a certain point, and it's not to say we have failed the dog as such, but we need to sort of just realize this dog isn't right for us. This dog would be much happier with someone else that can develop this dog into something that's it's actually essentially bred for, somewhere where the dog's
Yeah.
going to thrive. And if we're having those issues 24 hours in, it's a good sign the dog's not going to thrive at all. So let's see if someone else can take that dog and mold it into something that is going to be worthwhile and not problematic. But it does take a certain type of person to 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 take that sort of dog and do that sort of work. And unfortunately, most people in pet households shouldn't be getting those dogs. They should be getting Labradors or goldfish. Um, you know what I
Yep.
mean?
Do you know what? I think that is the absolute perfect place to leave it. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Ross, Mac, thank you so much for jumping on. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did as well. I think we touched on some really cool points here, and I hope that this is going to open people's brains up a little bit and look at things a little bit differently. But finish off by plugging your stuff. How can people find you? What are you doing? Obviously, most of my listeners are in Australia and America, but if people want to get in touch with you in any way, form, or shape, how do they do that?
Best way to do it, you can go through my Instagram. That's where I post most of my stuff. I do try and post a lot of content on there for free because, and I don't just say this, I do genuinely like to help people. Uh, if some of my content also makes you laugh, that's a bonus as well. I know it makes me laugh, so that's good enough. But if it also makes you guys laugh, then that's fantastic. But I do try to put a bit of education out there as well. If you want to reach out to me, you can always send me a DM. You can work with me remotely as well, whether regardless of what country you're in, we can figure out the time zone and we can go from there. Regardless of what issue you've got, I'm happy to help. But Instagram is the best place to find me on that. And even if you don't reach out to me, any sort of follow or support, a like in a video is always appreciated as well, because then that helps me get more of my content out to more people. And even if you don't necessarily need my help, it will help Mary Sue down the road that has her cockapoo that she doesn't know a single thing to do with. At least I can help her in some regard through my videos. And then
Yep.
maybe she'll reach out to me. And then we can just keep the world going around like that. And hopefully, all together, we can get dogs and their owners feeling just a little bit better.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. Fantastic. All right. Time to finish it up. Again, thank you, Mac Dog Training. And now to everyone who's listening, as you always know, I always finish up saying the same thing every single time. Now go fucking train your dogs.
Love
Goodbye.
it.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Beastly Talks. I hope you found it interesting and that you'll join me for the next one as well. If you like this podcast, please take a moment to rate and review it so that more people can hear about it. Or if you think this particular episode would benefit a family member, friend, or colleague, be sure to share it with them directly. You can follow me on social media at Viking Dog Trainer on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Thank you for your support and keep training your dog.